Now, the Government of National Unity says it represents the beginning of a new era anchored in national unity, peace, stability, inclusive economic growth, non-racialism and non-sexism. The Workers and Socialist Party is expecting to hold a meeting regarding the GNU. For more insights on the upcoming meeting, we're joined in studio by Mametlwe Sebei, the Workers and Socialist Party executive member. Sebei, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Now, the Socialist and Workers Party is calling on working class formations to urgently meet tomorrow in order to demonstrate against what you call the government of capitalist unity. What are your concerns of the newly formed government?
Well, I mean, I think it should be obvious by now. You have, a government made up of unrepentant, convicted gangsters, unrepentant, racist, unrepentant, tribalist, and the common denominator uniting all of them is basically a class conspiracy to implement a most brutal neoliberal austerity that entails an attack on the current and already worsening living standards of the working class people, as well as the rights that were fought for, that were hard won in the struggles, both against apartheid and the gains that were made in the 80s and so on, and in the 90s and so on. And I think what this signifies is a deepening crisis of capitalism in this country. And we've got to be able to face the working class and say, what these elections has represented is the fact that none of these parties actually represent the working class. None of them has the confidence of the working class. And the working class need its own political party to organize for struggles that working class is waging in communities, at workplaces, and of course on campuses, but also to organize for socialism and for revolution in this country.
So on what basis do you call them unrepentant?
Well, what do you call Freedom Front? What do you call IFP? What do you call Gayton McKenzie, right? Is he not a convicted gangster? Is Freedom Front apologizing for racism and apartheid? Is the IFP remorseful of the role that they played, in fostering the tribalism that we're also playing out in these elections? Is xenophobia that these parties are, many of them are agreeing on and so on? Is the DA dependent about neoliberalism and the fact that they want to further to lower the standards of the living of the working class people? Is it that they are not saying that even the minimum wage that we are earning as workers, a pitiful 4,300, that is actually a lot, that we need to be lowering that and so on? Are these people going to be addressing the historical injustice of the fact that the majority of the people in this country are landless, they've been dispossessed of the land, and the result of which, amongst others, is a massive housing crisis where our people are living in squalor and horrific conditions, which you will not even wish for your pet, right? This is a reality, and what these people are uniting on, right, it's not national unity, it's neoliberal unity. You have seen the relentless campaign that was waged by the so-called the market, which is nothing but a mystified representation of a cruel class interest of a tiny monopoly interest in the economy that continue to monopolize the ownership of the economy, to monopolize the ownership of the land and the mineral resources of this country to the exclusion of the vast majority of the working class and oppressed people of this country. And we say we need a struggle, we need a part that can be able to fight for that, not only on the electoral plane, but more than that, we need to be able to coordinate all the struggles that continue to characterize the working class revolt in all the main theaters of the struggles, either communities, campuses, industrial plane, and so on. But more than that, we need to be able to put on the agenda the question of socialism. That is the idea that through nationalization of the key sectors of the economy, of the minerals in this country, of the land, and putting this in the hands of the working class is the only way to solve the fundamental problem faced by the working class of unemployment, of the levels of poverty, lack of housing, lack of basic services. Because we need to be able to beneficiate these minerals in order to reindustrialize the economy. We have opportunities. There is a massive crisis of climate change in this country. We need to be able to lead in a green industrial revolution in a situation wherein we need to be able not only to be refurbishing our infrastructure, but to be developing a clean renewable energies in a way that we can be able to employ millions of young people that are unemployed, that have no hope. And this government is not going to be able to offer them a way out of that.
But some may argue that over the last 30 years, the neoliberalists were not part of government. And those issues and those ills that you make mention of now were not formed by then, but rather the mix of what we currently have could certainly reverse some of those ills that have been caused in the country.
When the ANC adopted GNU, that was a program of the DA, right? So the idea that there is difference between these two is wrong and wrong in extreme. It was the ANC that facilitated a massive program of privatization of key sectors of the economy, right? Which were under ownership of the state under apartheid and so on. They facilitated a casualization of labor in a situation which resulted in a situation wherein half of the working population in this country are on a minimum wage, 75% of them at the level of about 6,000 rand a wage, a monthly wage and so on and so on. We have a situation wherein they've removed a capital controls. We have a situation wherein services are rendered on what we call a cost recovery, which has pressed out of access to electricity, to water, and many other basic services, which, when you look at the RDP program, these were services that were supposed to be a means of redistributing wealth in a way that meant every person will be allowed at least to live a certain basic standard of life with access of certain basics, like water, like electricity, and many other services, regardless of their levels of income. All of that, right, are now rendered on the basis of a so-called cost recovery, and that is the reason that we have had certain astronomical increases in the tariffs of electricity, about 800%, in nominal terms in 2007 until now. Water is becoming more inaccessible to people and so on. But so are many other things, including, by the way, privatization of even those that are supposed to be fundamental rights, like access to health, access to education. Every figure in respect of that indicates that money is determination of a realization of the rights in the Constitution. That is a neoliberal program. That the only thing that the DA differ with the ANC on that is that your attacks are not enough. We want even that minimum wage to go away. We want the right to strike. That is the right of the workers to defend themselves, to be qualified. They've already qualified under ANC. They want even more now, where they're saying that we must be depositing some fee before we call on a strike and so on. They want to take our basic right to defend ourselves. That is what is in store for the working class insofar as the government of unity is concerned.
So in not using the accelerated policies and rather going back to the economic policies of RDP, what formation of government would you have preferred to see in order for the interests of the workers to be put forward?
Well, the thing is, there would not have been any of these parties that can resolve the problem, because this is not a problem merely of policy, by the way. It's an organic crisis of the capitalist system, not only in this country, by the way, globally. And that's the reason that you see, all this crisis happening and so on. And it's not just, delivery of this and that and so on. A very interesting conversation took place as I was coming here. My friend and comrade Aisha make a point that as I was having this very gloomy perspective, said, but something good is going to come out of the GNU. I said, what is it? Is that GNU is only going to reveal that the crisis is not just the ANC, but all of them. And all of them are united in the idea that the only way that we can organize society is on the basis of the private ownership of the means of production, of the minerals of the land, and that means in the context where the economy is monopolized, that ownership is monopolized by a tiny elite in society. And it's the interest of this elite that we've had in the weeks leading to the formation of the government of national unity that dictated which parties should be in the coalition. We don't think, by the way, that even the EFF is revolutionary. We need the party of the working class. the party that will be conducted on the basis of the unification of all the mass organizations of the working class, that is the trade union movement, that is the community civic, that is the young people, but also movements fighting around climate justice, migrant justice, gender justice, and so on. But we want the part that can be able to face the working class and say, there is no way out of this crisis other than on the basis of the revolution, on the basis of overthrowing the existing system, and we make sure that we seize political and economic power through a nationalization of the commanding heights of the economy of the land, but also of the mineral industry, so that we are able to overcome the crisis of mass unemployment, poverty, landlessness, lack of housing, and all the chronic shortages that are, of course, the reality of the working class in the most richest country in this continent.
So why only now? Why was this not formed prior to these elections in order for you to have a voice, possibly in this GNU, to look out for the interests of those workers? Well,
these elections are historic because what these elections have done is that they've broken decisively now the hegemony of the ANC, which has been central to the management, right, of the political and economic architecture of the management of the capitalist system in this country in the whole period since the 1994. And that's the reason that the bourgeoisie, right, have been hard at work in trying to find an acceptable replacement for the ANC, because they are alive to the fact that the DA has no social legitimacy, but so is a system which is not only not representative of the majority of the people that are excluded from participation in the economy, but because it is still predominantly white-owned and foreign-dominated by these key multinational corporations that have monopolized the ownership of the economy. There is a question, if you like, even of the cultural, the racial gap that separate them from the vast majority of the population, and that undermines, in many ways, the question of their social legitimacy and the social legitimacy of their system. And the ANC was instrumental in giving them that, in basically policing the working class, in brutalizing the working class, as they have done at Marikana, at the behest of this interest. The decisive rejection of the ANC in these elections, but also the fall in the support of all these major parties, is a devastating blow against the ruling class as a whole. And I think that represents an historical opportunity that we cannot miss. And that's the reason that, as Workers and Socialist Party, we have begun the process of public consultations with the formations of the working class. The meeting that we are going to be having at Workers Museum tomorrow is only the beginning of that process. We are going to be consulting with activists in Cape Town, in Durban, in Limbo, everywhere across the country, to say, how do we read this moment? This moment for us means none of these parties in parliament represent the working class, and they've been rejected as that. This is the minority government, even when you take all the parties combined. I mean, the ANC, it might have gained only 40% in the election, but of the eligible vote, it represents only 13% of the eligible vote in this country. When you take all of those parties combined, they are a minority. We need the party of the majority in this country. And I think that's the conversation that we want to be able to have.
So with the conversations that you are going to have in those consultations, what do you hope to achieve in the long run, in the next year or 5 years?
Well, we want to be able to say the workers' movement. We want to be able to say the communities. We want to be able to say there is a struggles that are taking place. I mean, when you look at the strikes that are taking place on a daily basis, I mean, part of the conversation I was having is that, I mean, you listen to even just a traffic report in the morning. It sounds like a daily updates about the revolts of the working class. This and that road, don't take it because there's community protests and so on. What does that testify to? Is the fact that there is a state of class war in this country. Not only on the side of the bourgeois class, the working class is fighting, the working class is in revolt. The problem here is the fact that the working class is not united. There is no centers of coordination, both in number of theaters of the struggles. I mean, since, if you like, then when the Sanko chose the alliance with the ANC over the protest of communities against lack and a failure of delivery of services, that meant that many of these communities are struggling on their own on the basis of ad hoc localized organizations that are not coordinated and so on. And more than that is the fact that the struggles of workers, of communities, of young people are taking place as if these struggles have nothing to do with each other. And the reality is, let's be clear about it. Even as a workers' movement, and I'm speaking from that perspective, right? The struggle for a living wage is simple. It's not just about what a worker gets at the end of the month. The quality of that wage is determined by how many people do you support. When you are supporting 8, 10 people who are unemployed, right? That determines what you make of that, 5,000, 8,000, and so on and so on. You are able to, so basically, like the struggle for living, for living wage. It is a struggle for free education. It is a struggle for housing, because these are things that the working class need for their very sustenance, particularly in the context of a crisis of the cost of living, where we have seen an astronomical increases in the prices of energy, of food, and many other basic things like transport, as well as access to many services, including energy, including education, health, because medical aid is swindling us, right? Because public health is collapsing. We try to opt for that. Even the middle class is drowning. So we need to be able to say, how then do we roll back these attacks? And the only way to do that is to unite first and foremost in struggle by rebuilding the movement, the mass organization of the working class. But more than that, we need the political strategy and organization in the form of a party to elevate the working class to power in its own right.
All right, Mametlwe, thank you so much for this conversation. Like you say, it's a war beyond race and tribalism, but rather a class war that needs to be fought. And you're meeting with those formations tomorrow and having those conversations. And hopefully it will be to the betterment of South Africans, that we move away from the political infighting, from the fighting of people amongst political parties, but rather in strengthening the country. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And that was Mametlwe Sebei, who is the Executive Committee member for the Workers and Socialist Party, speaking to us there.